The US just seized a Russian-registered Venezuelan-linked oil tanker that it's been pursuing across the Atlantic for the past 2 weeks. Right, it's a tanker known as the Marinera, though when the chase began, it was called the Bella 1. And it appears that it's the only vessel owned by a company based in Turkey, which was also sanctioned by the United States Treasury Department back in 2024, with US officials accusing the company of moving goods on behalf of the Quds force, which is an elite wing within Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. Though also, notably, the vessel is believed to have been transporting Venezuelan crude oil in the past, and with that, US forces attempted to board the ship last month when it was in the Caribbean and believed to be heading toward Venezuela. And that being an effort to enforce Trump's total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela. But the crew, they dramatically changed course. They sent out a distress signal and then they just went dark. But then 2 weeks later and thousands of miles away, they turned on their broadcast signal with a whole new name, re-registering as a Russian vessel, whereas before they were this stateless vessel flying under a false flag. And that's a very key thing here because, as one expert explained, once it's legitimately registered, it gets the protection of the flag. And adding, it's not retroactive. You can't say it was stateless 2 weeks ago, so we're going to say it's stateless now. And with that, Russia made what was seen as an unusual move of allowing the tanker to get what has since been described as a temporary permit to sail under the Russian flag without an inspection or other formalities. And actually, several other sanctioned tankers have re-registered as Russian vessels in recent weeks as well. In fact, at least 18 oil tankers hit by US sanctions have switched to a Russian registry, with many of them also having previously been sailing under a false flag. But for now, right, the focus is on the Marinera that the US has been pursuing for 2 weeks, even though it had never actually picked up any oil from Venezuela. And even though the Russian government made a formal diplomatic request that the US stop its chase. And all the while, this tanker was believed to have been heading toward a city in northwestern Russia. And while today, as the tanker moved northeast between Iceland and the UK, the Kremlin reportedly dispatching a submarine and other naval vessels to escort the tanker. At the same time, the US and the UK military scrambled aircraft in the area. And you then had reports quickly emerging that American forces had begun an operation to seize the tanker. Russian state media publishing footage reportedly taken from on board the tanker and appearing to show a US Coast Guard ship in the distance, as well as images purporting to show a US helicopter flying near the tanker. And sure enough, you then had the US European Command posting on X that the vessel was seized in the North Atlantic pursuant to a warrant issued by a US federal court. And going on to say the seizure supports POTUS proclamation targeting sanctioned vessels that threaten the security and stability of the Western Hemisphere. And then Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth adding, the blockade of sanctioned and illicit Venezuelan oil remains in full effect anywhere in the world. And actually, to that point, the Coast Guard also intercepted another Venezuela-linked tanker today, this one in the Caribbean, although the attention really, it's been focused on the one registered in Russia, but especially as there have been fears of a Russia-United States standoff. So in the end, there were reportedly no Russian vessels in the vicinity of the tanker during the seizure, though I will say that also doesn't mean that there's not going to be fallout from this. I mean, you've got the Russian Transport Ministry already issuing a statement accusing the United States of breaking the 1982 UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, saying no state has the right to use force against ships properly registered in the jurisdictions of other states. And you also had a senior Russian lawmaker from the country's ruling party arguing that the US's actions, they equated to an act of outright piracy. But also another big thing with everything we're talking about here is it may lead to more than just strong words from Russian ministries. It might sink any peace deal in Ukraine. And I mention that because right now, European, Ukrainian, and American negotiators are in Paris trying to work out another deal, right? And the negotiators, which included figures like Jared Kushner, which I guess means Trump is serious, they were all worried about the same problem. How do they deter future Russian aggression? And for that, they want to implement multi-layered defense guarantees for Ukraine. This, including by providing weapons and training to Ukraine's troops, which is probably a given, but the real breakthrough was the promise for a supporting force that would give land, sea, and air support. Now, I will say no information about how big that force is supposed to be has been released publicly. The US and allies are also supposed to monitor and verify that ceasefires are being adhered to. That also won't mean American boots on the ground, right? Trump has ruled that out explicitly. But France and the UK have signed a declaration of intent to send troops to Ukraine as part of any official peace deal. Even Germany was keeping the possibility of boots on the ground open, with their chancellor saying Germany will continue to engage politically, financially, and also militarily. This could include, for example, deploying forces for Ukraine on neighboring NATO territory after a ceasefire. And for Ukraine, these security guarantees, they're a must-have for any peace, to the point they won't even consider a peace deal without them. Also, another must-have for any peace deal is that the US needs to actually be on board, and so far that does seem to be the case. Right, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff writing on X, we have made significant progress on several critical work streams, including our bilateral security agreement framework and a prosperity plan. And adding, we agree with the coalition that durable security guarantees and robust prosperity commitments are essential to a lasting peace in the Ukraine, and we will continue to work together on this effort. But at the same time, you had Kushner saying, this does not mean we will make peace, but peace would not be possible without the progress we made today. And he might be right that despite major headway on a common agreement being made yesterday, that peace still might not come. But at the end of the day, Russia has to agree, and boots on the ground, it just seems to be a line in the sand for them. And so far, at least as I'm recording, they haven't commented on the new peace deal, but the US's actions, they do amount to a direct confrontation with Russia. And while there are still some unknowns here, you might expect a massive response, but so far, the Russian Foreign Ministry has just called on the US to ensure humane and dignified treatment of Russian citizens on board the tanker. And there's possibly two reasons for this. One is that it's Orthodox Christmas in Russia. So just like the US and many countries, things kind of completely shut down at this time of year. So, it is entirely possible we see some stronger language and response in the coming days. But also, you can't look at this without considering that ever since Trump got reelected, Russia has been trying to kind of not confront the US on really so many issues. And in some ways, it looks like it's working, as Trump has entertained Russian demands for peace in Ukraine. Though the biggest payoff might be coming soon after Trump wrote a massive anti-NATO piece on Truth Social. Wrote a piece where he bashes members of the alliance and claims that the US props it up before then adding, Russia and China have zero fear of NATO without the United States, and I doubt NATO would be there for us if we really needed them. A statement that, many people took as Trump threatening to leave NATO, which was then kind of contradicted in that post itself, because right after Trump added, we will always be there for NATO, even if they won't be there for us. So of course, then he made sure to end it by making it clear that he was behind the US version of America that Russia and China fear.